Everything at Heartland felt calm, until the moment Amy noticed something that changed everything. It was small, easy to miss, but powerful enough to send a chill straight through her. And from that moment on, nothing felt safe anymore, not the ranch, not the barn, not even the place she'd called home her whole life. This is the moment when Ty and Amy start to realize the danger isn't far away. It's already standing at their door. The day began like any normal morning at Heartland, but Amy couldn't shake the strange feeling weighing on her chest. She tried to brush it off as a lack of sleep, maybe too much work with the horses, but the uneasy silence around her kept returning again and again. Even the air felt different still, heavy, almost like the land itself was holding its breath. As she walked across the yard, she noticed Spartan standing stiff, ears pricked, watching the tree line with a sharp focus that made her stop in her tracks. Spartan never reacted like that unless something was wrong. Amy moved closer, hoping it was just a wild animal passing through. But the longer she watched, the more certain she became that Spartan wasn't just looking, he was alert. Cautious, almost afraid. Ty came out of the clinic a few minutes later, wiping his hands on a towel, ready to tease her about being up so early. But the moment he saw her expression, the smile faded from his face. He followed her gaze toward the trees, his eyes narrowing with concern. He didn't say anything at first. He didn't have to. The whirring inside him matched hers perfectly. He walked over to Spartan's stall to calm him, but something on the ground made him freeze. A set of tire tracks leading behind the barn, tracks that weren't there the night before. Ty crouched down, touching the marks lightly, and felt a sharp wave of unease settle in his stomach. These tracks weren't from anyone they knew, and whoever had driven there had no reason to be that close to the horses unless they wanted something. Amy stepped closer and asked if it was something to worry about. She expected Ty to shake his head, tell her she was overthinking, but instead he stood up slowly, jaw tightening, eyes darkening the way they always did when he sensed trouble. He didn't say it out loud, but they both knew the truth. Someone had been too close to the barn, too close to their home, and too close to their daughter. Before they could talk more, Jack and Tim came out arguing about repairs on the fence. Their voices carried across the yard, sharp and loud, but the tension between Ty and Amy made everything else fade into the background. When Jack saw the tire marks, his whole posture changed. The arguments stopped. Tim stopped talking too. They all bent down in silence, studying the tracks as the heavy feeling in the air grew stronger. Jack straightened up and looked around the ranch with the same protective seriousness he had worn ever since Amy was a child. He said the tracks didn't belong to anyone who'd been working on the property. Tim added that someone must have come late in the night, maybe even while they were all asleep. His tone wasn't dramatic this time. It was sharp, grounded, deadly serious. Amy felt a cold shiver move through her as she imagined someone creeping so close without anyone knowing. She glanced back toward the house where Lindy was still asleep, safe and unaware, and her heart squeezed painfully. Whatever was happening, whatever this was, it was no longer just about the ranch. It was about their family. Ty paced a few steps back, thinking deeply, trying to piece things together. He mentioned a strange feeling he'd had at the clinic the previous evening, like someone had been inside before he arrived. A drawer left slightly open, tools shifted just enough to notice. At the time, he'd brushed it off. But now, with the tire tracks and Spartan's behavior, it didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. Amy's voice shook when she asked what this meant. Ty didn't want to scare her, but he also refused to pretend nothing was wrong. He told her they needed to be careful, to stay alert, and to keep Lindy close. Jack suggested they increase security around the house, but Amy knew deep down that more fences and locks wouldn't stop whoever had done this. Danger wasn't at a distance anymore. It was already watching, already waiting, already close. Amy's fear grew heavier, but so did her determination. Whatever it took, she would protect her daughter and stand beside Ty. Yet even as she tried to calm herself, one thought echoed in her mind like a warning she couldn't ignore. This was just the beginning. The uneasy morning slowly shifted into a tense afternoon, and the air around Heartland grew heavier with each passing hour. Amy tried to focus on her chores, telling herself the tracks could have been nothing more than a lost driver turning around. But deep down, she knew Heartland wasn't the kind of place people just wandered into by accident. Every time she walked past the barn, she found herself glancing over her shoulder, feeling the same sharp chill she'd felt earlier. Even the horses sensed the change, moving restlessly, lifting their heads at the slightest sound. As if the entire ranch could feel eyes watching from somewhere beyond the trees, Ty spent most of the afternoon at the clinic, but his mind wasn't on his work. He kept replaying every strange moment from the last few days. Doors he thought he locked but found open, tools slightly moved, and that strange quiet he couldn't explain. The more he thought about it, the stronger his suspicion grew. When he finally stepped out to get some air, something new caught his attention. One of the side windows had a faint fingerprint smudge on it, smeared across the glass at an angle that didn't match his own. He reached out, running his thumb over it, and felt his stomach twist. Someone had pressed their hand there recently, and it wasn't anyone from Heartland. He hurried toward the house to tell Amy, but halfway there, he noticed something else. The gate leading to the back field wasn't fully closed. It hung open just an inch, subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice, but Ty knew every latch and hinge on that ranch by heart. He pushed it open fully and followed the dirt path, trying to stay calm. Footprints, small, deep, rushed were scattered in the loose soil. They led toward the woods behind the property, then disappeared where the ground hardened. It wasn't a worker or a visitor. Whoever it was had been moving quickly, almost like they were trying to hide. Amy found Ty standing at the gate, staring into the woods like he could see something the rest of the world couldn't. Her heart pounded as she walked up beside him, already knowing something was wrong before he said a word. When he told her about the fingerprint on the clinic window, her breath caught. It wasn't just a feeling anymore. It wasn't just Spartan acting strange. It wasn't just tire tracks near the barn. Someone had been watching them up close. Too close. Tim showed up a moment later, drawn by the serious looks on both their faces. When Ty explained what he'd found, Tim's expression shifted from confusion to alarm. He didn't make jokes or shrug it off like he usually did. Instead, he went quiet, the kind of quiet that meant he was taking the situation personally. He muttered something about not letting anyone threaten his family, then headed back toward the house with a determined look that didn't fully calm Amy, but made her feel a little less alone. Jack joined them soon after, and when he heard about the window and the prints, his voice dropped into a tone Amy had only heard a handful of times in her life. He said that whoever had come onto the ranch wasn't just curious, they were testing boundaries, checking how close they could get without being noticed. Amy felt the ground beneath her feet grow colder at the thought. The idea of someone sneaking around Heartland while they slept made her chest tighten painfully. Ty tried to stay strong for her, but she could see the worrying behind his eyes. He kept looking toward the woods, jaw clenched, as if expecting the stranger to step out at any moment. He told Amy quietly that he didn't think this was random. He didn't say everything he suspected, not yet. But the tension in his voice told her he was hiding something darker, something that scared him even more than the idea of a stranger on the property. Amy reached for his hand, searching his face. She asked if he thought she and Lindy were in danger. Ty didn't answer right away, and that silence hit her harder than any words could have. Finally, he said that something wasn't adding up, and until they knew the truth, they needed to take every sign seriously. Amy swallowed hard, feeling the shift inside her the moment fear became a protective instinct. She nodded, knowing she would do whatever it took to keep her daughter safe. But as they turned to head back toward the house, the wind moved through the trees with a slow, eerie whisper, almost like a warning. And though they didn't see anyone, Amy couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched at that very moment. By someone patient, someone hidden, someone waiting for their next move. As the day slipped into early evening, a quiet tension settled over Heartland, the kind that made every sound feel louder and every shadow feel longer. Amy tried to keep herself busy inside the house, but her mind kept drifting back to the woods, the open gate, and the fingerprint on the clinic window. She found herself watching Lindy more closely than ever, listening for her footsteps, checking on her even when she was only in the next room. Every motherly instinct inside her felt alert, protective, and uneasy. She hated the idea of living in fear, but she hated the idea of danger near her daughter even more. Ty stayed outside with Jack for a while, walking the property, checking the fences, and trying to piece together any sign they might have missed. But the more they searched, the more questions they found. Nothing looked broken or stolen. No horses were harmed. No tools were missing. Whoever had been on the ranch wasn't looking for things they were watching people. And that thought hung in Ty's mind like a heavy weight he couldn't shake off. He remembered the strange patient he'd treated weeks ago, the one who had shown up out of nowhere, acted strangely, disappeared without paying, and left behind an uneasy feeling Ty had pushed aside. Now that memory came back with sharper edges. By the time Ty returned to the house, the sky had turned a deep, quiet blue. Amy was waiting for him in the kitchen, and the moment she saw his face, she knew he still hadn't found any answers. She asked him again if he thought they were in real danger, and this time, Ty didn't try to soften the truth. He told her about the patient, the one who had threatened him after Ty refused to give him medication he didn't need. A man who had said things that didn't feel like empty anger, things that now echoed too loudly in Ty's mind. Amy felt her stomach twist as she listened. She hated the idea of someone holding a grudge against Ty, but the idea of that person lurking around Heartland was even worse. Amy asked if he thought the man could be behind the tracks and the fingerprints. Ty wasn't certain, but he couldn't ignore the warning signs anymore. She stepped closer, searching his eyes, hoping for any sign that she was imagining things. But Ty's voice held a heavy seriousness she had never heard from him before. He said everything pointed to someone trying to send a message, and they needed to take it seriously. Before they could talk further, Lou walked in holding her phone. She looked upset in a way that made both Ty and Amy stand straighter. Lou said she'd received a strange message on the Heartland email, a message with no name, just a single bold sentence. "You can't protect everyone." The words made Amy's breath stop. Ty reached for the phone, reading the message again, his jaw tightening so hard it looked painful. This wasn't a harmless warning. It was something more deliberate, more personal. Tim joined them, having overheard part of the conversation, and immediately demanded to know what was going on. When he saw the email, his temper flashed, the same fierce anger he always had when someone threatened the people he cared about. He said they needed to call someone, police, security, anyone. But Jack held up a hand, calmer but no less serious. He told them they needed to think clearly, not panic, and understand why someone would target Ty and Amy in the first place. Amy felt a wave of confusion, fear, and frustration wash over her. All she wanted was for her family to be safe, but everything around her was growing more unsettling by the minute. She pressed a trembling hand to her forehead, trying to steady herself. Ty stepped beside her, placing a reassuring hand on her back, but she could feel the tension in him too. He wasn't just scared, he was angry at himself for not noticing the signs sooner. Jack finally spoke again, his voice low and firm. He said the situation had reached a point where staying at Heartland might not be the best choice, at least not for now. The idea hit Amy like a shock. Leaving Heartland felt impossible, unbelievable, wrong. But when she thought of Lindy, the decision became harder to resist. She couldn't put her daughter in harm's way. Not for the ranch, not for pride, not for anything. Ty knew it too. The silence between them said everything. Heartland was no longer the safest place for their family. Amy felt tears sting her eyes as she realized the truth she didn't want to accept. They might have to leave the home they loved, at least until they understood who was threatening them. And as she looked around the kitchen, the place where so many family moments had been shared, she felt a deep ache settle in her chest. But before she could speak, before she could even breathe fully, another sound cut through the quiet air of the house. A loud thud outside, sharp enough to make everyone freeze. And in that tense, frozen moment, Amy understood something clearly. Whatever danger was coming, it was getting closer. The thud outside wasn't just a random noise, it was heavy, deliberate, and close enough to shake the quiet inside the house. Everyone stopped moving at the same time, as if the sound had reached straight into their chests and held their breath hostage. Amy felt her heart leap painfully as she turned toward the window. Lou slowly set her phone down. Jack straightened his back with the calmness of a man who had faced danger before. But Ty moved first instinctively, protectively stepping toward the door with a tense, focused expression Amy hadn't seen in years. Before Ty could reach the doorknob, Jack stopped him with a firm hand on his shoulder. Jack whispered for him to wait, to listen. The air suddenly felt thick, almost too still. Even the usual sounds of the ranch seemed muted, like the land itself was listening. Then came another sound, the faint crunch of gravel under a slow, dragging step. Not an animal. Not the wind. A person. A person who didn't care about being heard. Amy felt chills run down her arms. Every warning of the day, every uneasy sign, every instinct she had been trying to ignore came rushing back at once. She quietly slipped toward Lindy's room, unable to stop imagining the worst. Her mind flooded with questions. Who was outside? How long had they been watching? And what did they want? When she peeked in on Lindy, the little girl was still peacefully playing with her toy horse, unaware of the danger creeping closer to their home. Amy swallowed hard and lifted her into her arms, holding her close as if she could shield her from the world by sheer will. Outside, Tim grabbed a flashlight and stepped toward the door, but Jack blocked him too, shaking his head. Ty leaned in close to Jack and whispered that if someone was bold enough to come onto the property after leaving threats, they needed to be careful, not reckless. Jack nodded, then motioned for everyone to get away from the front windows. For a moment, the house felt like a fortress on the edge of a storm, battlegrounds forming silently in their minds. The noise came again, this time from the side of the house. Slow steps, measured like whoever was out there wanted them to know they weren't alone. Ty's muscles tensed, every instinct screaming to confront the intruder. But then the sound shifted, moving away from the house toward the barn. That was enough for Ty to break Jack's hold and stride toward the back door. He didn't go far outside, just far enough to listen. When he saw the barn door slightly ajar, something inside him snapped. He hurried back in, voice low but thick with urgency. Someone's been inside. Amy felt her knees weaken. She tightened her hold on Lindy as Ty described what he saw: hay scattered where it shouldn't be, tools moved, a bucket tipped over like someone had stumbled inside in the dark. Amy's voice cracked as she asked why someone would go into the barn. Ty didn't have an answer. And that was the terrifying part. Whoever this was, they weren't just lurking, they were exploring, tracking their movements, testing the edges of their safety. Lou suggested calling the police right away, but Tim argued that by the time authorities arrived, the intruder would be long gone. Jack listened to both sides, weighing the fear in their voices. He finally said what no one else wanted to say. "This isn't going to stop tonight." The room fell silent. His meaning was clear. This wasn't a one-night scare. This was someone who had a reason to keep coming back. Amy's heart clenched as she realized she couldn't keep Lindy in a place where someone was boldly walking around in the dark. She looked at Ty, and the moment their eyes met, the truth hung between them. Heavy and unspoken, they had to leave Heartland. Not forever, but until they knew who was targeting them and why. Ty nodded almost painfully, as if the decision cut through him. Heartland was home. It was safety. It was their family's roots. Leaving felt like tearing a piece of themselves away. Jack, sensing their fear, stepped closer and gently suggested a place they could go, a place far from the main roads, quiet, safe, and watched over by people they trusted. He mentioned Caleb and Ashley's ranch. Remote, secluded, and still surrounded by people who cared deeply about Ty and Amy. Amy felt a flicker of relief at the thought, but it was mixed with sadness. She never imagined she'd have to run from her own ranch, from the place that held every important memory of her life. As the night deepened outside, the family gathered in the living room, the weight of the decision settling over them. They didn't know who the intruder was or what he wanted, but they knew one thing with perfect clarity: they couldn't risk letting him get any closer. Amy held Lindy tightly as she whispered a quiet promise to protect her no matter what. Ty wrapped an arm around them both, feeling the harsh truth settle into his bones. They would flee Heartland at dawn. And as he looked out the window one last time, the shadows near the barn seemed to shift. Almost like someone was still out there, watching, waiting, planning their next move.